I want to update you on what's going on with Julian Assange, because it's very important. And with the campaign and all the attention on that, I don't want people to lose sight of what is going on with Julian Assange. So there was a hearing today, first of his extradition hearing in the UK. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange is at high risk of suicide if he is sent to the U.S. To face claims he endangered the lives of whistleblowers around the world, a court has heard. At an extradition hearing in London, Assange's lawyers argued he is the victim of a politically motivated prosecution that forms part of Donald Trump's, quote, war on investigative journalists. But the U.S. government claimed some sources had, quote, disappeared after the WikiLeaks founder put them at risk of serious harm, torture, or even death by leaking classified information. James Lewis, QC, opening the case against Assange, said on Monday that information published by WikiLeaks was useful to enemies of the U.S. In response, lawyers for the 48-year-old editor and political activist have warned he could face, quote, fatal consequences if he is extradited to America, where he faces 18 charges, including espionage and hacking allegations. Assange faces up to 175 years in jail if he is found guilty of all the charges, which relate to 2010 and 2011. Mr. Lewis told Woolwich Crown Court, which is sitting as a magistrate's court, that most of the charges related to, quote, straightforward criminal activity in a, quote, conspiracy to steal from and hack into the Department of Defense computer system. Quote, these are ordinary criminal charges, and any person, journalist or source, who hacks or attempts to gain unauthorized access to a secure system or aids and abets others to do so is guilty of computer misuse, the barrister said. So right here is why this is so dangerous. And for those of you who don't know specifically what they are talking about, when they say these are ordinary criminal charges, and any person, journalist, or source who hacks or attempts to gain unauthorized access to a secure system or aids and abets others to do so is guilty of computer misuse. So basically, what the Trump administration and the United Kingdom judge, in this case, is trying to do is trying to lump Julian Assange, a journalist, in with just any person. Because, frankly, journalists have different protections than any person would have. They're trying to say that Julian Assange, by talking to Chelsea Manning while Chelsea Manning in 2010 was trying to figure out the passwords to get into the Department of Defense system, they're trying to say that by Julian Assange, a journalist, essentially egging on Chelsea Manning to try and get into that system, that he aided and abetted Chelsea Manning's criminal activity. By the way, Chelsea Manning is still in solitary confinement in Virginia. Let's not forget that. So this is, of course, absurd. History does not do this to journalists. If they want to, be careful with the blue one. If they want to go after Julian Assange and say he aided and abetted Chelsea Manning in quote unquote hacking the Department of Defense computer system, then they need to retroactively go back. I'm not saying I want this, but if they are going to be intellectually consistent, then they would have to retroactively go back and prosecute Daniel Ellsberg, Daniel Ellsberg. They would need to also, not Daniel Ellsberg. They would need to retroactively go back and prosecute the New York Times, the Washington Post, for publishing the Pentagon Papers. Because do you think the Washington Post, do you think the New York Times weren't egging on sources who were by their own choice, choosing to break the law, to access documents, to get into databases? A journalist speaking with a source, and a source who is choosing to risk their own security, their own freedom for the greater good. A journalist not going to the authorities, a journalist, urging that source to do it is not a crime. That is not aiding and abetting. That is not participating in hacking into the Pentagon system. Julian Assange was never actively on a computer trying to hack into the Pentagon's files. That's just not true. It never has been true. That's why President Obama's Department of Justice did not prosecute WikiLeaks or Julian Assange, because they understood that that is not, that would be a total infringement and frankly demolishing the First Amendment. Of course, the Trump administration and his Department of Justice do not care about the First Amendment. They don't care about any amendment, really, other than the Second Amendment, for political gain. But the bottom line is that they have no case. This is not a real case. Julian Assange did not aid and abet Chelsea Manning. What this is trying to essentially kill any form of serious investigative journalism or radical whistleblowing. And people could argue all day about Julian Assange. There's some criticisms that I think are fair. There's others that I don't think are fair. He's not perfect. He's not a villain like some people say, but he's certainly not perfect either. I think most objective person can agree that some of the things he's done are worth debating. But you cannot debate whether it was a good, heroic, momentous thing to expose war crimes the United States perpetrated against Iraq, against the Middle East, the disinformation and misinformation that went out to American citizens by our own government. You could say maybe WikiLeaks didn't take every proper protocol to protect sources. You could have that debate. But what the United Kingdom right now is doing, because frankly, I'm just going to be honest with you, to me, this looks like it's just being rubber stamped. You think Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the UK, who's BFF with Donald Trump, you think his courts are going to rule against extradition of Julian Assange to the United States? And this will have a chilling effect, because even if it is a Democratic president next, the precedent that is being set by the Trump administration and frankly the corporate media journalists who are basically silent on this. There is not a lot of reporters for the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Daily Beast, all these people who rant and rave about Trump's assault on freedom of the press. They're not out there speaking up for Julian Assange. Well, I am, because this isn't about whether Julian Assange is a good guy. It's not about whether he's a bad guy. It's not about whether you think he's a villain, whether you think he's a hero. It's not about whether you think he's a Russian asset or not. It is not about any of that. This is about criminalizing journalism. He might not be a journalist in the form of somebody that goes to press conferences and asks questions. He might not be a journalist in the form of somebody that sits down with politicians and throws them softball interviews. But any person, big, high profile or low profile, that exposes hard truths, that exposes the corruption of government, that exposes war crimes, is a journalist. And as a journalist, you cannot be thrown in jail for life, or it cannot be accused of aiding and abetting by simply being aware that a source might be committing a crime and basically talking to them while they're in the act of committing a crime and urging them to do so. That is not aiding and abetting. And journalism and the First Amendment protect journalists who do that. And if the Trump administration wants to redefine that, then frankly, they're going to have to retroactively go back and they're going to have to prosecute New York Times journalists who egged on sources to break the law, Washington Post journalists who spoke with and urged sources to break the law, and many others. I know a lot is going on. I know there's a lot of organizing right now. The Bernie campaign focused next on South Carolina, Super Tuesday. There's organizers and protesters and activists organizing around climate change, the gun rights, the gun control movement, immigration. There's so many different causes. There's so many different things people are focused on. But folks, do not lose sight on what is going on in the UK right now. If there are groups where you live, get involved with supporting Julian Assange. Again, it doesn't even matter if you think he's a hero or a villain. This is about journalism, not Julian Assange. So that's why I started with Julian Assange, because it's that important. And there's some people very close to me in my life that disagree with me on this. That's fine. But as a journalist, and Jen, who's in the super chat right now, and I'm not comparing myself to Julian Assange at all. But as a journalist who has worked on things and is currently working on certain things, that I'm not breaking the law, but I might know sources that are taking grave risks to themselves to expose the truth. This has implications for me. This has implications for Jen. It has implications for all actual investigative journalists who take risks and expose to the truth. If they're going to get away with throwing Julian Assange in solitary confinement for the rest of his life, don't think they won't try to do it to me, to Glenn Greenwald, to Jeremy Scahill, to Aaron Mattei, to name your pick. Abby Martin. Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you. Status Coup.